So the question, if I understand it, is how can we stay in our power as female leaders when someone has triggered us? So I think if you embrace the very nature of that question and to comprehend that only you can allow a trigger to take you other than somewhere positive that initiates growth and awareness and empowerment for yourself, you see, is part of the shift in thinking that we can uplift here today. And so I think that if we can appreciate that as women, we have culturally learned to submit, surrender, become passive, quieten our voice or swallow our truth, all of those things, if you will, for so many generations and centuries, that it is something now that the DNA itself is in great need of repair. And as that DNA comes into a transformation, if you will, which I think awakening and enlightenment and spiritual healing certainly has the power to do, we are reversing centuries of suppression where we merely surrendered to oppression rather than surrendering the ego itself unto the divine, unto the Great Mother, unto the cosmic Omega, if you will. But if we can really appreciate that the ability to surrender is also a strength. So let's bring together, if you will, this sacred moment of being triggered from something or someone outside of oneself and the ability to transform through surrender, but through divine surrender. And so when we speak of what can we do if someone triggers us? And so as we allow this light of the power of surrender that takes any situation and accepts it first of all. And so true surrender is to accept. But when one accepts from service, from genuine selflessness, the whole demeanor of surrender, the whole embodiment of what surrender truly is merely an empowerment of transmuting that moment to a moment of empowerment. And so if we can really ground today, if you walk away with the grounded learning, the new entraining, if you will, that all triggers, no matter what they are, can be reversed into an energetic that very much teaches, enlightens, empowers, heals, and transforms. It doesn't matter what the trigger is. It doesn't matter who or what the circumstances are exempling to you. Use them. And so if one can begin to shift the entire awareness from the push and pull of triggers, of how we respond to outer triggers, and perhaps entrain the mind with some new thought and new being, perhaps calling every trigger a happy trigger, or calling it happy trigger, or trigger happy, anything that can begin to entrain the mind differently, if you will. Yes, differently. If it is a trigger, it is your moment to be empowered. And through that sacredness of genuine divine surrender, and you accept, and you embrace, and you love, and you serve, whatever the person, place, or circumstance might be, that called the triggering into its moment of awareness, because if you are triggered, there is a perfection to it. There genuinely is a perfection to it. All triggers means that energy is on the move. And when energy is on the move, that is the easiest time for it to be transformed. It is no longer concretized. It has been roused. It has been stirred. So the very place inside of yourself that has been roused by the perfection of the outer trigger, you see, is pointing the finger to where you can heal, transform, transmute, and empower yourself. Allow the trigger to find its target within yourself, because every single trigger is a law of attraction phenomena, because that which you call to yourself is that which you will draw in. And so whatever polarity remains within yourself that is not yet in unity, but is calling for unity. So if you can remember that an outside trigger points to, arouses, sparks into your awareness, even uses the sting of pain, emotional pain if you will, to get your attention to the place of polarity within yourself that is calling to be healed, in fact, is ready to be healed by the fact that you have indeed been triggered. And so being triggered is a positive of sensitivity. It's a positive of spiritual awareness. It's a positive of higher consciousness. If you were dead and asleep and unable to rise to the holy moment of transformation and higher consciousness and new embodiment of mastery, if you will, then you can begin to say that to become trigger happy is indeed a very sacred space, what did you say, of spiritual maturity, of deep wisdom, of the ability not only to contain and accept yourself and the trigger itself, but also to contain and accept the outer circumstances that indeed gave you the mercy of bringing your awareness to wherever inside of yourself was immaculately calling for unity. And whenever there is a polarity that is brought into your awareness, and if an individual or a circumstance can push your button, you're going to see the opposites that have become active and brought into your awareness. But those opposites can come into divine union. And so I can give 1,000 examples of when opposites are in temporary conflict within yourself. The part of you that so feels called to change the world, and also the part of you that perhaps feels hopeless and despairing. So if you see that the trigger can stir either end of the stick, and yet when that bright idealism to change the world and the hopelessness and despair that perhaps feels as though there's no possibility of changing the world come together, and through embracing the self, accepting the trigger, surrendering to the moment, but surrendering to the mystery of the moment, the miracle of what will reveal itself as resistance, as defense, as reaction, no longer has sway. And that is an inner governance, my dears. It's an inner governance. So take it in from this teaching today to be trigger happy, if you will, so that when a trigger takes place, it is merely your signal, a profound divine signal to use that trigger for your awakening, for your healing. And what I will assure you is that the ability to process can become ever more instantaneous. And so even if you take it in and perhaps spend some alone time later that day or when the following days to come, and you really do the delving with the self-love and compassion that can allow an inner truth to be revealed, this will quicken, it will accelerate as you learn to be trigger happy, particularly as women of power, because there is a great deal that we must transform within ourselves, because to truly step forward in leadership roles all over the world, even in leadership roles of bringing the wisdom of the Divine Mother into our own families and homes, our own communities and neighborhoods, that ability to embrace the moment no matter what that moment is reflecting to us allows us to become spontaneous and instantaneous. Instant transformation, instant transmutation, instant reversals of darkness to light. This is what has happened for me on the path of awakening and moving through the thresholds of enlightenment. To learn to not push the trigger away, to not resent the trigger, and certainly to not blame outer circumstances, no matter what they might be, that roused our defenses or roused a sense of indignation. The moment we surrender and we embrace and we accept and we offer both ourselves inwardly and the circumstances outwardly, that grace of compassion, all things then find that moment of union. And in that moment of union will be the omniscient power of love that reverses darkness to light, you see. That literally transforms your own circumstances of content internally. That the radiance of that awakening, the radiance of that transformation, the radiance of that epiphany, or that moment of union internally, completely alters what is taking place outside of yourself. And so for women of power, for each of us that are coming into ever more visible leadership roles, if you will, and this certainly applies to men and women of consciousness everywhere. It applies to awakened leadership, to service leadership, to altruistic leadership. Be humble and surrendered when the perfection and mercy of those outer triggers take place. They are rousing your awareness for when you can use that holy moment as a moment of unification, or in the divine love that heals and transforms polarities, is indeed your miracle moment. Sit with this teaching, dear ones. It is one of those jewels of awakening. It is that principle of using the surrender of the feminine to empower how you respond to all things within all things.